The protein bar in my hand was stale as hell, but I chewed through it anyway while the fourth Zoom call of the morning connected. It was not even 6:30 yet. My kitchen still smelled like burnt coffee from the pot I forgot to clean last night. It did not matter. I had been up since 4 o'clock chasing down a regional logistics failure that would have tanked our quarterly service level agreement if I had not caught it. That was normal now. My name is Walter Vance. I am 58 years old, and I live in Huntersville, just outside Charlotte, North Carolina. I have been the backbone of one of our biggest enterprise contracts for 5 straight years. Crisis after crisis, I kept the lights on. I fixed the unfixable. Back when our founder, Gordon Finch, was still running the day-to-day operations, he used to call me the last safety net. He said if Walter did not catch it, no one would. That was back when execution actually meant something in this industry. Now all anyone cares about is how loud your pitch deck sings on a 30-minute call. I watched new hires pitch transformation strategy like they invented duct tape, while I handled actual critical escalations from billion-dollar clients. If you miss one deadline, you are a liability. If you save their rear from a $1 million outage, they forget it by lunch. But I did not complain. That is not my style. I documented everything quietly and thoroughly. Half the people presenting in meetings did not even know where our infrastructure logs lived. They could not point to a root cause on a map, but they knew how to sell vibes. They polished their slide transitions while I talked to tech leads at 2 a.m. to keep the databases synchronized. I had spent decades in this field, starting back in the late 1990s when we still tracked inventory on physical clipboards and server racks were kept in small, unventilated closets down the hall. That hands-on experience gave me an intuitive sense of how physical assets actually move across the country. I did not need a flashy dashboard to tell me when a regional hub was bottlenecked. I could see it in the database latency queues. I held together 12 regions and 3 verticals under budget, got 0 shoutouts, and did not even get a thank you in our Slack channel. There was one call, maybe 2 years back, where Gordon told the board I was the only reason that client had not sued us. That was the last time I heard my name in a public forum now. I was not even sure the new executives knew what I looked like. They pulled me from client-facing channels to streamline communication, shifted meetings off my calendar, and pushed updates I had written under someone else's name. I kept screenshots, audit trails, and my own version of an operational diary. I did not need applause. I needed leverage, and I had it. They just did not know it yet. That morning, I finished the call, closed my laptop, and stared at the wall. Then I opened my private backup folder and started reading a document I had not touched in almost 3 years. It was the Master Service Agreement, the original one. I found my clause in less than 60 seconds. Then I made another pot of coffee. The contract was signed back in 2020, during the peak of the supply chain crisis when everything was on fire. Centurion Logistics, our biggest client, was ready to walk away. They ran a massive temperature-controlled distribution network for pharmaceutical and medical supplies across the eastern seaboard. If their logistics tracking went down for even an hour, millions of dollars in sensitive medical freight would spoil in transit, and hospital chains would be left empty-handed. Rachel Thorne was the head of risk management on their side. She was sharp, blunt, and did not waste a single second on corporate fluff. We had never met in person, but we did not need to. We both ran hot on caffeine, deadlines, and operational stability. She called me at 7 on a Tuesday morning back then and said they needed a single name, not a department, to own their account end to end. I told her to put my name down. Rachel and I spent 9 straight days rewriting that master service agreement. We went back and forth on late-night Zooms and edit drafts, arguing over compliance metrics, PostgreSQL database replication schedules, and automated failover tripwires. That was how Clause 6.4b was born. Her legal team called it a continuity safeguard. Our executives, eager to lock in a $14,000 annual deal, barely read the fine print. They just wanted the signature. But the clause was clear. It stated that if Walter Vance, the designated lead escalation contact, voluntarily resigned from Aegis Systems, Centurion Logistics would have the unilateral right to terminate the entire agreement immediately without penalty. I made sure that language stayed in, word for word. For 5 years, I held that contract stable, even as the corporate structure above me began to decay. I was the name in ink. The entire partnership rested on my continuation, and the new leadership was about to forget the very foundation they were standing on. I remembered those early days vividly. The server rooms were constantly overheating, the APIs were failing due to unannounced cloud provider updates, and our customer support line was ringing off the hook. I spent many nights on the phone with Rachel, manually rerouting shipments and rewriting database queries to make sure their delivery trucks arrived at the hospitals on schedule. We built a system of mutual trust. She knew that as long as I was at the keyboard, Centurion's logistics pipeline was secure. That trust was written directly into the contract under Delaware corporate law. Aegis Systems' new executives thought contracts were just pieces of paper to be optimized by spreadsheets. They did not understand that to clients like Centurion, a contract was a personal covenant of operational reliability. I looked at the digital copy of the signed agreement, closed the folder, and sat in my quiet kitchen. The morning sun was just starting to hit the pine trees in the backyard. I took a slow sip of my coffee and realized that the board had forgotten the golden rule of business. Never alienate the person who holds the key to your largest asset. My daily drive down Interstate 77 into Charlotte used to be filled with the sound of quiet country music and plans for system expansions. Now, it was just a countdown. 2 days later in the present day, after years of holding things together, he showed up. His name was Gavin Fletcher. He was the new VP of Operations, fresh out of some overhyped business school, with not a single wrinkle on his blazer and not a day of field experience under his shiny belt. I knew the type before he even opened his mouth. The founder had a golf buddy, Harold Fletcher. Harold had a son, and now we had Gavin. He was a clown in a fitted jacket, acting like he invented systems that had been running smoothly since he was in middle school. Gavin carried himself with an insufferable air of unearned confidence, his leather briefcase always smelling of new polish, and his shoes clicking loudly on the linoleum floors of our office. During our first virtual meeting, Gavin walked into the Zoom room, nodded at me, and asked if I could take notes for the call. I did not blink. I just unmuted my mic and said I would be happy to take notes on his first major production outage, which would likely happen soon. He laughed like I was joking. By the end of week 1, I was no longer invited to any of the operational syncs. My standing client review meetings were gone. There was no explanation, just calendars updated, and my name removed like I had been ghosted. I pinged my director about it, and he just said Gavin was streamlining the reporting lines, and there was nothing to worry about. Then the updates started rolling out. Gavin introduced half-baked templates, buzzword-heavy reports, and a new dashboard that looked good on a mobile phone but buried every meaningful service-level agreement metric. I recognized the data they were presenting. It was my data, my logs, my models, and my escalation flow. But my name was completely gone, scrubbed clean from the files like I had never touched them. I forwarded every single copy to my personal email, timestamped them, and labeled the folder Clown Show. In week 2, Gavin dropped a message in our company-wide Slack thread. He wrote that some of our systems were still running on legacy clutter, and they were cleaning house. He did not tag me, but everyone knew it was a direct shot. Half the department reacted with flame emojis and graphics of bulldozers. I did not reply. I just took a screenshot, added it to my folder, and labeled it Slack Shade. People bought into Gavin fast. He talked fast, smiled wide, and threw around phrases like frictionless vertical alignment and operational velocity. The executives loved him. They called him a fresh set of eyes and said he was re-energizing the organization. Meanwhile, we missed our internal failover test for the first time in 9 quarters because Gavin pushed a deployment window over my direct objections. He wanted to deploy a cosmetic update during peak transaction hours just to show the board he was moving fast. I flagged the failure in the operations channel, pointing out that our primary database had failed to sync with the backup node, leaving us vulnerable to a total system crash. The log showed a replication lag of over 600 seconds and a critical serialization error in our write-ahead log. Gavin replied that we should take it offline. We never did. I started keeping detailed notes after every single incident. I documented every time he overrode a system check, every time he ignored an operational flag, and every time I told him a process would not scale, and he responded that we would iterate later. One night, close to midnight, I caught a metrics alert that he had silenced. He had buried an entire regional outage under a scheduled optimization label. That outage had delayed critical deliveries to 6 major hospitals in Virginia. It almost cost us a major compliance audit. I did not raise hell. Not yet. I just copied the alert thread, saved it as a PDF, and moved it to my secure folder. I labeled it burial attempt number 3. Gavin thought I was checked out and that I had given up. I let him think. There is power in being ignored, especially when you are the only one who knows where the system's skeletons are buried. In week 3, I bumped into him in the hallway near the break room. He was holding an expensive iced coffee, checking his stock portfolio on his phone. He gave me a wide grin and said he appreciated the groundwork I had done, and they would try to preserve some of it as they evolved the platform. I smiled right back and told him to make sure he read all the old documentation before he started yanking wires because some of them bite. He just laughed. I did not. Back at my desk, I checked the administrator audit logs. Gavin had just overridden access permissions on a handful of client folders, including mine. I flagged the log, added it to the growing document stack, and labeled it Tampering Begins. He was poking at things he did not understand and breaking systems he could not even define. He was so focused on showing immediate efficiency gains that he was cutting away the load-bearing pillars of our infrastructure. He had no understanding of the delicate balance required to keep our databases replicated across multiple regional networks. He saw compliance and backup protocols as unnecessary friction, speed bumps on his path to a promotion. I watched him make these changes day after day, adding every single administrative override to my log folder. He was building his own trap, and I was simply documenting the construction process. His metrics were polished for the board, but the underlying machinery was running on borrowed time. By week 5, my access to the client dashboard was completely gone. There was no heads up, no email explanation, just a sudden revocation of my permissions. I tried to log in for a Monday morning preparation call, and a red screen popped up showing access denied. I refreshed, tried the admin panel, and found myself locked out there as well. The client had not requested this change. I sent Gavin a message explaining that my access had dropped and I needed it reinstated for the morning client review. Gavin replied 15 minutes later. He wrote that there was no need, as they were consolidating access, and that an offshore team would be handling the reviews going forward. I called him directly on his office line. It was the first and only time I ever called his phone. I asked him if he had cleared this access change with our legal department. His voice was casual, like he was booking a haircut. He told me that legal works for us, that it was fine, and that the client would sign off on the transition. I told him I did not share his confidence. I asked if he was absolutely sure, because our contract had very specific language around operational continuity and lead ownership, and this move could trigger a termination clause. Gavin chuckled. He told me I was overthinking things, that this was about scaling the business, and that clients wanted automation, not manual babysitting. I told him Centurion Logistics did not want that, and they would enforce the clause. Gavin did not even ask which clause I was talking about. He just said they had coverage and that I was not the only adult in the room. I did not argue. I just hung up, opened the contract PDF, and highlighted clause 6.4b. I saved the file to my private drive. 2 days later, we had our quarterly all-hands Zoom meeting. The entire staff, the board of directors, and the executive team were on the call. It was supposed to be a routine presentation of our operational metrics. My part was scheduled at the halfway mark. I had kept the core contract systems stable, despite Gavin spinning the wheel like a drunk driver. The performance graphs were clean, and we had not missed a single service-level agreement deadline. I shared my screen and began to speak, explaining the past 90-day incident resolution curve. That was when Gavin cut in, his voice booming over the feed. He thanked me and announced that they were pivoting roles on the project. He told the entire call that as of this week, I would be transitioning out of direct involvement and that a dedicated offshore team was taking over. Then, with a single click, he muted my microphone. In front of 140 staff members, the board, and our general counsel, Edward Stone. Gavin muted me. My camera was still on, and everyone could see my face. I did not flinch. I did not attempt to unmute. I did not raise my hand, and I did not type a single word in the chat. I just sat there in my kitchen, looking at the screen, and let the silence roll over the meeting. I watched the little red microphone icon, with a slash through it, appear next to my name in the participant grid. Edward Stone did not say anything during the call, but right before he logged off, I saw him pull out a notebook and write something down. That was all the confirmation I needed. Later that afternoon, I opened the contract again, reading every line of Clause 6.4b. If the named escalation lead resigns voluntarily, the client may terminate the agreement in full. The named lead was me. There was no wiggle room. I did not tell anyone what I was planning. I did not warn Gavin. I did not contact legal. And I did not even reach out to Rachel Thorne at Centurion. I had held this company's mess together for 5 years. I had eaten more corporate garbage than any executive in that building even knew existed. And now I had been muted like I was legacy clutter. I closed my laptop and took the rest of the day off. I spent the evening sitting on my porch, watching the fireflies in the yard. The feeling of being muted on a call with the entire company was strangely liberating. It was the moment the last thread of loyalty to Aegis Systems was severed. I realized that my value to the company was never going to be acknowledged by the new leadership. To them, my 5 years of perfect execution were invisible because they did not result in a flashy presentation. They wanted a system they could control completely, without having to rely on the expertise of a senior engineer. I was more than happy to let them try to run it on their own. I knew that without my direct oversight, their automated systems would crumble under the weight of the first major data spike. The IT database administrator, Clara, had sent me a private message expressing her shock and apologies, but I simply told her to keep her head down and focus on her work. The legal trigger was ready, and all I had to do was step aside. The night before the next big alignment meeting, I stayed late at the office. The building was dead quiet, save for the low hum of the vending machine down the hall. I was not nervous, I was just ready. I cleared out my desk, packing 5 years of notes, outage logs, and client contact sheets into a single, sturdy cardboard box that once held printer paper. I threw the rest of the clutter in the recycling bin. I slid my physical security badge into a small envelope, sealed it, and wrote a single line on the front with a marker. Effective 9:01 a.m. I left it right on the center of my desk. The next morning, I brewed my coffee slowly. The meeting invite popped up on my screen at 8:55 sharp. It was a mandatory quarterly alignment meeting hosted by Gavin, with 140 people on the list, including the board of directors. I joined the Zoom call at 8:58 with my camera off and my microphone muted. I had already configured my virtual background. It was a solid black screen with bold white letters stretching across the center. Effective 9:01 a.m. I had tested it on my personal phone the night before to ensure the text was perfectly aligned and readable even in low light. Gavin was already speaking, running through his slide deck with his usual loud, confident tone. He was showing a slide with a cartoon rocket ship labeled Velocity pointing toward a cloud icon. He was talking about operational velocity and how these changes would ensure continuity for their major enterprise contracts, specifically calling Centurion Logistics their crown jewel. That was my cue. At exactly 9:01, I turned my camera on. At first, nobody noticed my square in the grid. Then the bold text of my background caught their attention. I did not say a word. I just lifted my security badge in my left hand and my signed, dated resignation letter in my right. I held them steady in front of the camera, clear and visible for everyone to read. My arms felt slightly heavy holding them up, but I did not waver for a second. Someone on the board unmuted their mic, gasped, and quickly muted themselves again. The legal department's square shifted. I saw Edward Stone, the general counsel, lean so close to his camera that his forehead went out of focus. He was reading the timestamp on my letter. Gavin kept smiling for another second, looking confused, before his corporate grin cracked. He stammered that we could discuss this offline and that this was not the right forum. I did not move, I did not lower the papers, and I did not say a single word. Gavin's voice began to crack as he told me to turn off my camera. The Zoom chat window on the side of the screen exploded with messages from staff and directors asking if this was official. Edward Stone was now talking rapidly to someone off camera, his expression tight and pale. The founder's square remained dark, but I knew Gordon was watching. Gavin tried to regain control of the meeting, telling everyone to move forward with the agenda, but his voice was thin and shaking. The board members looked shocked and terrified. They knew Clause 6.4b. They knew exactly what my resignation meant for their $14,000 contract. I lowered the papers, placed them on my kitchen table, and clicked the button to leave the meeting. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and walked out to my car. The morning air was cold and clean. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, looking at the quiet office building. It was 9:03 a.m. inside. The legal calls and contract reviews were already starting. The countdown had begun, and Aegis Systems had less than 24 hours before the bomb detonated. I drove home with the radio off, enjoying the silence. The weight of the last 5 years had vanished. I knew that by the time I reached my house, the executives would be frantically calling my phone, but I had already set it to block all numbers from the office. I was no longer their safety net. They wanted to streamline their operations, and they were about to get exactly what they asked for. I sat at my kitchen table, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and watched the morning news. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that I had handled my exit with the same precision and quiet execution that I had brought to my work every single day. I did not need to shout to make my point. The letter and the badge spoke for themselves, and the legal machinery I had set in motion would handle the rest. I spent the afternoon pruning the oak trees in my front yard, feeling the cool autumn breeze on my face. By the next morning, the fallout was complete. At exactly 7:12 a.m., Centurion Logistics delivered a formal termination notice to Aegis Systems. The PDF was signed by Rachel Thorne and delivered directly to their executive board. The subject line read, Exercise of Clause 6.4b. It was 5 sentences long, cold, clinical, and immediate. The $14,000 deal was officially dead. The board called an emergency crisis meeting 30 minutes later. The Slack leaks from my former team members came fast. One director asked when the board had been made aware of the key person clause. Edward Stone replied that it had been in the signed agreement since 2020. Then the audit logs were revealed. Gavin had ignored 3 separate written warnings from compliance regarding contract continuity, and Edward had documented a 4th warning in an email 2 weeks prior that Gavin had completely ignored. Gavin tried to spin the disaster in the executive channels, calling the contract loss a strategic reset that would create breathing room to realign their operations. The board did not want a pitch deck. They wanted their revenue back. During the investor call later that afternoon, a representative from the lead venture capital firm based in New York asked who currently owned the relationship with Centurion Logistics. Gavin froze. There was a 10-second silence on the call that felt like a decade. Edward Stone finally unmuted and said that no one owned it, because Walter had resigned. By Friday morning, Gavin Fletcher was stripped of all operational authority. There was no company announcement. His name was simply removed from the Slack directory. His calendar was wiped clean, and his email account was deactivated. When an intern asked where he was, a senior engineer replied with a single skull emoji. The consequences did not stop there. A major merger and acquisition deal that Aegis Systems had been negotiating for 6 months fell through. The buyers, a prominent private equity firm based in Chicago, pulled out immediately. Their technical due diligence team had flagged the operational risk, stating that if a single engineer's resignation could wipe out the company's primary source of revenue, the firm had 0 structural value. Recruiting was frozen, budgets were locked, and 5 other senior engineers resigned in solidarity over the next 2 weeks. I was already gone. I had accepted an offer from a small, specialized development and logistics shop outside Raleigh. The team consisted of 8 people, a solid client pipeline, and a CEO named Silas who wore flannel shirts and started meetings by asking how we could solve problems without wasting each other's time. The office was located in a renovated brick warehouse in the historic district, where the sound of the passing trains and the smell of fresh timber provided a grounded, honest working environment. There were no layers of corporate management and no pitch deck artists. I signed the contract the day I walked out of Aegis. A week later, a package arrived at my home. It was a small white box with no return address. Inside was a bouquet of hand-cut lavender, eucalyptus, and a single snapdragon tied together with twine. There was no card, just a printed note that read, "If you want to come back, we will do it your way." I read the note, smiled, and slid it into the folder next to my printed copy of Clause 6.4b. I did not call them back. I did not reply. It was too late for that, but the message was received. I shut the drawer, sat down at my new desk, and logged into my clean dashboard. I had spent 58 years learning that you do not need to raise your voice to make people listen. Sometimes, you just have to turn on your camera, show them the contract, and let the silence do the talking. My new role was exactly what I had been looking for. I spent my days working with people who understood the value of solid infrastructure and clean code. We did not spend hours preparing slides to justify our existence. We kept the databases synchronized, monitored the queue metrics, and made sure our clients' data was secure. It was quiet, steady work, and for the first time in years, I slept through the night without worrying about a midnight system crash. Aegis Systems was struggling to keep their remaining clients from leaving, but that was no longer my concern. I had built the foundation, and when they decided to mute the builder, they lost the right to live in the house. I spent my weekends tending to the tomatoes and peppers in my Huntersville garden, finding peace in the simple, predictable laws of nature, far removed from the empty noise of corporate strategy.